Welcome to another installment of the United Way's Community Impact Series, Advancing the Common Good. My name is Katie Gallagher, and I'm a marketing specialist at the United Way of the Lewis and Clark area. With us today, we have Betsy Miller. Betsy is with the Governor's Office of Community Service, and you're the Ready Montana Coordinator?
I am.
Thank you for joining us today, Betsy.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, and so the Governor's Office of Community Service is not a United Way partner agency. However, for many years, the United Way has been involved in a disaster and emergency preparedness here in Lewis and Clark County. So we brought on the Governor's Office of Community Service today to talk a little bit about preparedness. We know that wildfire season is coming up fast on us. It's already June. And DNRC, Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, as well as other federal and state experts, have warned us that it's probably going to be an above average fire season. So can you share a little bit about what the Governor's Office of Community Service and specifically the Ready Montana program is about and how you're addressing wildfire preparedness?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people get confused about why there's a disaster preparedness program with the Governor's Office of Community Service. But when you really start to look at it, the number one group of people responding to disasters are volunteers. And so we've recognized that, and we've also recognized the importance of preparing ahead of time so that if people are ready, they're more likely to volunteer and help out their community. So that's kind of how the Ready Montana program started.
Okay.
And as far as the wildfire season goes, yeah, it's been just a really weird spring, and everybody has just been kind of confused by the weather patterns. We had a really dry early spring, and then a lot of rains have come through, but they're still predicting an above average fire season later in June and July.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. So the Red Cross obviously has many volunteers across the state of Montana, as well as here locally in Lewis and Clark County. There is a Lewis and Clark County Disaster Action Team, but then also volunteer firefighters in Montana is huge. I forget what the statistic is exactly, but I think it's over 70% of our first responders are volunteers in the state. And so definitely important to recognize the work that volunteers are doing as volunteer firefighters and volunteer EMTs
Absolutely.
across Montana.
Yeah.
So you mentioned individual preparedness. So what are some things that an individual can do to, one, not start a wildfire? We know that about half of wildfires in 2012, which was the worst wildfire season in Montana since 1910 with a big burn, was caused by humans caused half of those fires. So what are some things that humans can do to not start wildfires? And then on the other side, if a family is impacted by a wildfire, how can they prepare their home and their family to mitigate the damage?
Sure. So a lot of the partners around the state are using a campaign called the One Less Spark, One Less Wildfire.
Okay.
And it was something that was started in California, but it has common messages that apply to a lot of different scenarios. And that's really just trying to get people to be aware of some of the most common ways that humans cause wildfires. So in Montana, a lot of debris burning can get out of control, and that's one of the huge causes of the wildfires. The one earlier this spring over around Red Lodge, Billings, that one was caused by a debris burn that just got out of control.
That already happened.
Yep.
And it's June. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's one of the huge causes in Montana that we're hoping people are just aware of. So stay with your burn pile, be aware of the wind conditions, don't burn on a windy day.
Yeah.
And then if you want to go out and have fun on the weekends and go camping, you want to have a campfire, first of all check the burn restrictions in your area. If it gets really dry, you're not going to want to have any kind of wildfire or campfire.
Campfire, that could turn into a
wildfire. Exactly,
yeah.
And then also if you're leaving your campsite, make sure that fire pit is cool to the touch. Throw some gravel on it, water, stir it around, and then make sure it's cool before you leave.
Okay.
That's huge. Anybody who's going boating, if you're hauling a boat on a trailer, make sure that chain is not dragging on the ground. That's a huge cause of fires. So just little things like that we want people to be aware of. So throughout the summer, if you hear of the One Less Spark campaign, just know that we're trying to reduce some of those human-caused fires.
Okay, and then what about the family? So we know that more and more people are moving into what we call the wild-urban interface, which is the places where dwellings mingle with the woods, which we have a lot of that around Helena, specifically in the South Hills. So what are some things that homeowners, if they're living in those areas, can do to protect their homes if there is wildfire? And importantly, make it safe for those firefighters, and they keep those firefighters safe and save their home.
Definitely. Some of the easiest ways to do that, first of all, have a communication plan with your family have an emergency contact both within the state and out of state.
Okay.
If there's an emergency going on, sometimes it's easier to get a hold of someone in a neighboring state rather than someone local.
Yeah.
Make sure that your kids know that. If you have kids, neighbors, get them on board. Have an emergency meeting place for your family if something happens and you're at work, or your kids are at school.
Yeah.
You want to know where everybody is in case you can't get a hold of them. Another thing, we want people to have an emergency supply kit that they could just throw in their car and hit the road if they need to evacuate quickly. Things like important documents, passports, some extra water. We recommend 3 days worth of water for each family member.
Okay.
And some food, clothing, just some basics
Yeah.
that it's right by the door, everybody knows where it's at, and you can pack it in a hurry. And then as far as protecting your home, if you are in the wildland urban interface, we encourage people to trim the trees around their home. I know it can be really difficult to cut down trees that are looking beautiful, but at the same time it's going to make that landscape around your home a little bit healthier and more able to respond if a wildfire is coming up.
All right, and that's the documents are huge. Looking back at the Colorado fires a few years ago, minutes to evacuate for some families, and having those important documents are important if you're leaving your home and you may never come back. I know that Fire Safe Montana, which is a local or a statewide organization, has some great resources for preparing your home or your property for fire, and then the state auditor's office actually has great checklists. That you can then go through and inventory your home. If you do lose your home, and which was a horrible accident, but if it does happen, knowing what's in your house is very important. So
definitely, and with some of these tools, with smartphones and iPads, it's so easy just to go through your rooms, one by one, and just take pictures of what you have, and then at least you have photo evidence of some of those things. That's a great first step. And then taking that to the next level and actually documenting the price and things like that, and just cataloging it will help you so much if something were to happen. Yeah, definitely probably saves a headache down the road with the insurance companies. So what about volunteering? Going back to the volunteering aspects of disasters, do you encourage people to get involved ahead of time? And let's say something does happen in Helena, whether it's a wildfire or an earthquake or a flood, and people want to help out. What do you encourage them to do and actually not do during those situations? Yeah, well, you had a great point. We always encourage people to get involved ahead of time. Okay. I know it's hard. I know people like to put it off until the last minute, but getting involved with an organization is going to get you into the mix so much faster. Organizations such as the Red Cross, they can provide training and liability coverage if you do want to go out and volunteer with a disaster. So getting involved that way is just the smart thing to do. If you show up on the scene of a disaster, chances are it's going to be chaotic and you might not get plugged in, you might not be able to help. But if you are ready to go ahead of time, you might be able to help out a little bit more. And so on that same note, so you're talking about it's chaotic when a disaster strikes, and some volunteers are amazing and they do a lot of the response. But sometimes they can be a hindrance to the emergency responders if you're donating stuff that's unneeded or trying to donate your time when there's a lot of other stuff going on. So that applies for other places in the country and world as well. I mean, the earthquakes in Nepal just occurred, devastating flooding in Texas. And so how can people learn locally about, they want to help, of course that's so important to help, but is there a resource out there where they can learn about ways to help that will actually help people and not hinder any efforts? Yeah, definitely. So we've been working on a project, a new website called respond.mt.gov. Okay. And we've compiled a lot of information about how to effectively and responsibly donate and volunteer after a disaster. So a lot of helpful tips about where you can get involved locally or statewide, and some organizations that are involved in response efforts. And so if you want to make a cash donation to them and let someone else do the hard work, you're more than welcome to do that, because cash is usually the preferred donation rather than clothing or materials. You can just do a lot more with a dollar bill. Yeah, and the people know where that needs to go. Yes. The people who are on the ground doing the work. So thanks for coming in, and I know we talked a lot about an above average fire season and some not so good predictions for the year, but I think it's important too, before we leave, to
thank ahead of time all those emergency responders, paid and volunteers, that are going to be out across Montana this year fighting fires, protecting livelihoods. So thank you for coming in, and to the people that are viewing, please visit respond.mt.gov to learn more about how you can donate and volunteer responsibly.
Thank you for having me.